Hey, I'm Stephen Webster with F5 DevCentral, and we're here today for the Guru panel on DevCentral for DevOps. I'm here with John Gross, Joe Pruitt, Colin Walker. Thanks to everyone for coming in today. We're going to talk about DevOps, but before we do, I just want to ask us to go down the table and introduce ourselves. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is John Gross, and I'm a developer on the iHealth team. The iHealth is an application that customers can use sort of free of charge to figure out problems on their big IPs. It provides some in-depth diagnostic reporting on issues they might be finding on their big IPs. And I'm just one of the developers on the team.
iHealth is awesome, by the way.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot today because it actually really ties into the DevOps idea, which is why you're here, shockingly. So iHealth is something we've been talking about to our customers and users and stuff for years now, but it's not just for things are broken. It's often for planning or upgrade ideas, or there's all kinds of information you can glean from that tool. It's really, really helpful.
Talk a little bit about it. I'm Joe Pruitt, architect on the DevCentral team. I do a lot of things from DevOps on our site to fun little projects like the iRule editor, things like that. My background's in product development. I've been in the dev org for a long time here at F5, and just get to do a lot of fun things with APIs in the community and DevCentral.
I'm Colin Walker. So I am on the DevCentral team as well. I'm a solution developer there, which means I do everything from writing content to code for the iRules for the site and all that kind of stuff. I go around and talk to people about what we're doing a lot. I talk about whether it's iRules or iApps or iControl or this DevOps thing I've talked about several times now to user groups and people around the world. And my background actually is I've done the whole gamut from I did tech support, and I did systems administration, and then I was a software engineer for a while, and now I'm a solution developer. So I've kind of done the whole thing. So the DevOps thing is kind of near and dear to my heart because I've played both of the different roles along the way.
Right,
so
right.
that's why I'm here, I think.
All right, cool.
How about you?
Who are you, Mr.
I'm the community platform guy for DevCentral, so a developer for sure, an app guy, and so yeah, my focus is actually on the software, the applications that are DevCentral, and we all work very closely on, I think what we call DevOps. Although that's actually where we wanted to start. There seems to be a lot of discussion, confusion, opinion about what DevOps really is. And
it's kind of like asking, what is cloud?
Right. Cloud.
How many hours do you have?
I saw the commercial. I know exactly what it is.
Absolutely.
My phone saves my picture somewhere. So
walk outside, look up fluffy things.
Right. So maybe we could start off just talking about what we think DevOps is, and if you guys could chime in and let us know what you all think DevOps is, and we can talk about that
or
for a little while
or whatever. Right?
And then as we go with specific questions about what it is, how it works, how we've done it. I don't know that we do it the way we do it.
Right.
I'd be curious to find out how other people do it.
We didn't read a book or anything. We just
exactly
happened.
Exactly. So
and I think one of the interesting things too is how specifically F5 gear can help engender a DevOps environment because of the way we do things and where we sit in the network and the abilities that the devices have. It kind of tends to lead towards that environment. So if people have questions or comments about that too, I personally would think that's interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an organizational component too to talk about,
absolutely.
Right? Because
without question,
we on the DevCentral team have combined, traditionally our networking team and our infrastructure team and our development team. There's the lines cross and go diagonal and make circles sometimes. So, trying to understand how that's been successful for us. I think we could talk a little bit about that too. But anyway, Colin, what do you think? Yeah, exactly.
Back in our early messaging, right, with iRules and network development, you've got this brick wall, right?
I remember that slide.
Right? And then you've got your network guys over here
absolutely.
who are taking change order tickets who don't know anything about the applications. You've got your application guys who say, well, we need something implemented, whether it's SSL or whether it's some redirection, that kind of thing. But they don't understand the network side of it. So there's this brick wall, right? This communication barrier between the two. So we've been working strong as a company trying to tear down that brick wall, getting the two groups talking together. And I think the fusing of those is really how I define DevOps. But
yeah, I would completely agree. So it's interesting. So years ago, back many eons ago for me, I worked at a pretty decent sized web hosting company, right? We had 50 or 60,000 customers, that kind of thing. And I worked first in as a sysadmin on a platform, and then very shortly after in the same company, same platform, I was a software engineer once I moved to the programming thing. And so seeing it from both sides, it really is interesting. There is that wall, and I've lived on both sides of it in the same organization. It's really interesting going to the same change control meeting, one as the systems guy that is trying to fight for he's laughing, security and trying to make sure that patches have been tested and make sure that the app changes aren't just getting pushed out flagrantly in the whole bit.
Right.
And then literally 2 weeks later, sitting there as the software guy going, no, we have to make this change, and there was no communication. You're right, and this was 12 years ago, right? But
historically, there's different skill sets, different knowledge
absolutely,
bases, right?
And we really are. F5 has been getting that message for a long time about trying to tear that wall down, and that you really need to be an application team. There is a network, there are applications, but the reality is neither one really matters without the other, right?
Right, and I can certainly say that there's things that we solve on what would traditionally be a networking side that dramatically impact the workload on the application side.
Yeah, well,
usually
it was fun
reducing
watching you show up
right?
and us talk about eye rolls, and you're like, wait, come again?
Yeah, can you explain that one more time?
Yeah.
So you're able to manage and mitigate in front of the application in ways that app guys don't understand. That it's a new concept to be able to change traffic and change what's coming into the app servers in a way that we don't you can buy us time so that we can go back to the app later and mitigate it. But so it's a lot of things, right? It's definitely bringing those two traditionally separate teams together, but also in order to do that you got to have a lot of procedure.
Yep.
Right, you got to have a lot of policy, and I know we went through a lot of that, just documenting out, okay, we want to make a change management in particular, whether someone's changing an eye roll and that breaks what appears to the user, it broke the app, right? But it's really in the network stack somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about how
Come on, eye rolls don't break things; they make them better.
They make them better. I know, I know, Joe.
Well, it's just like anything. The wrong line of code can do something. So
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter where it is. Where there's
Yeah.
some config in the DB or the app or the network,
Right.
or any config change that isn't completely tested can go awry.
Sure.
a virtual server profile setting on that
Absolutely.
work or a
Absolutely.
firewall setting. Yeah.
Right, but it's also interesting to be able to realize that you can fix problems in places you didn't traditionally fix them.
Well, I guess actually stumbling onto that concept, you asked what I would call DevOps.
Yeah.
That is kind of what I would define it as, which is we just said the wrong change anywhere can break something, right?
Sure.
Whether it's the firewall or the ADC or the application or the database or the file store or anything. Any one of those points of failure, if there's a single point of failure, if it gets changed, can interrupt application delivery. And really what we care about as companies these days most of the time is making sure the user gets what they want. They make sure the app works. So to me, DevOps is the idea of a team that focuses on that as a whole.
Yeah.
Rather than, I'm the networking guy, I own these 6 boxes, and I don't care what happens elsewhere because this
Right.
is my domain. It's a team that, whether it's one team or people that are designated from each team that work together or some kind of group that gets put together that, like you said, we on the DevCentral team do it innately, break down the barriers and say, no, I know that I'm a networking guy, but what I really care about is user X getting the application they want, whether it's performance issues or availability issues, or and if not, or frankly, how do I ensure they are, and how do I work with the other interested parties to make sure that happens? That's to me what DevOps is.
Yeah, ideally it refocuses the lens of what that success looks like.
Exactly.
Right? It's not success is not the equipment
My
didn't
monitors
go
are
down.
up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, my monitors are up. The success is it working all the way through the entire application.
What's the user seeing?
Right.
I think one of the interesting things for me is I come from a startup background, and in a startup, there is no everyone is DevOps because everyone owns all the pieces, because you have to, if people are gone, you have to be able to cover everything.
Sure.
It's kind of how we are as a team.
That's
Yeah, and
well, it's where it
worked.
came
And
from for us, right?
Right, and I think that sort of that ethos is what you have to bring into larger organizations. I know on the iHealth team, we've spent a lot of time trying to get we have a cross team group that works IT, networking, development, and support services, and getting all of those groups to buy into the fact that we all own the application and we all need to make it work, and we can't just live in our little worlds like you were talking about earlier, Colin. It's sort of like coming back to a startup route where everyone is involved, and committed and invested in making sure that the application works.
Well, and one of the things so I totally agree. That's exactly what I'm trying to say, and you said it better than I did. But one of the things that I've heard leveraged against that, people say, well, the whole DevOps thing is great, except you can't scale it because if everyone's involved in all of the decisions, it slows you down. But the reality is, okay, so on a small enough team, you can't all be involved. You have to be anyway, right? Like you're saying, you have to all be involved for outages and whatever. As those teams grow into larger enterprise customers and companies and all those sorts of things, well, okay, so you still might have a traditional networking team, and they wouldn't all be involved in the DevOps, but you would have representatives from that, right?
Exactly.
And you basically just create a slice of each team, and that would be the DevOps team, and then they come back to the main teams or whatever it's called, right? So if you have 80 networking guys running your network, all 80 probably wouldn't be involved in DevOps because that would be a nightmare,
That'd
right?
be a disaster.
80 developers, 80 networking guys, 80 right, all that stuff. But if you have 2, right, and then each team comes together and it's the whole, they counsel and discuss what's going to happen, and they come back and drive those changes into the individual teams. That's very scalable, right?
It does sort of raise the issue of where is the best place to solve the problem, though, right? Because there's in our environment, there's a few places you can solve the problem. And so you have to sort of take a step back and say, who, not just who and how, but why are we going to solve it in this particular layer? So,
and it really does take a certain level of you have to detach yourself. Everyone kind of knows I'm kind of an iRules geek. My thing.
No
Love
way.
it.
Really?
I know. Shocking. This is news to everyone. I'm outing myself for the first time. I know. Shut up. But I have to be able to let go and go, well, it would be really cool and interesting and fun to solve this with an iRule, but it might not make sense.
Right.
If it makes sense in the app, great. And likewise, you might go, well, but I've always fixed it in the app, but if I can show you, no, but there's a reason to do it in an iRule, it goes both ways. We all have to have an open mind and say what's actually best for the end game, right? The end user.
Yeah. So in a scenario where, we've got admins around the world that need to maintain something, it may make more sense to go ahead and invest the cycles in making the app work for them, because we've got to expose that to a large group. Whereas if we just need a quick fix and we've got a significant issue to resolve, it's very easy and quick. It's probably a lot faster to do it in an iRule than in the application.
Yeah.
But you have to think about what business problem you're solving when you make those decisions.
But in that same breath, having that expertise in both places means that if you need to fix something quickly because something's broken,
it's fast.
maybe the iRule is fast, and then the application development can go back and fix it for real.
Yeah.
Right, the fact that Stephen and I like the whole, if something comes up where there's, security patching or who knows what it is, and we need to fix now, in 10 minutes, one of us, Joe or myself, or we all write iRules on the team, we can write an iRule and get it rolled out, and then we're immediately and directly involved with the application guys and say, hey, so here's what we fixed and why. How is the best way to roll this in? And once you do that, we'll take this off and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, ASM and iRules in particular, just providing air cover, for
That's a good way of
issues
putting it,
on the
air
application where we are not going to mitigate that on the app fast enough, and so you can grab a lot of air
you
cover
have 10
quickly.
minutes, go.
Right.
Literally.
Right.
Yeah.
But that does provide some troubles down the road as far as you've got a solution that's working. How do we prioritize this back?
How do you unwind that?
So it's important to follow that through, right?
Yeah.
But I see that. We see that as problems sometimes. We've got a solution now. We've got all these other high priority things. How do you schedule rolling those in?
So it's almost
but I think that's like, speaking to that, that's a problem that you solve internally, because the priority is making sure that your customer is getting what they need.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so those are processes you have to sort of internalize.
And it's almost like, so it sounds, we're talking about it sounds like what you almost need is, sure, you need, the network person or people, you need the development people, the server people, the security people, whatever those groups are that all tie into app delivery, and you almost need the project manager or customer advocator to keep you honest. Like, okay, great, do what you're going to do, but don't lose track of how you're doing it and why.
The project doesn't end with that solution.
That's right.
You got to track it through to a full completion.
I don't know if that explains DevOps or not, but I think it kind of does.
We got a few questions.
Yeah, we do.
That kind of tie into.
So thanks, Joe. A few questions. Does having a programmable layer 7 capability in the network path make the application behavior less deterministic? If companies with great gong fu, where does ownership of the iRules development, QA, and development reside? That's a great question.
It's a great question. It's completely open-ended, so it's up for discussion, which is fun.
Right.
It is a very good one, for sure.
I'll have a crack at it
Go.
first. This is something we've actually run into with the development team, the iHealth development team, working with the ASM implementation that we've got in front of the iHealth servers. And it does make the application behavior less deterministic from our viewpoint, because we don't necessarily have insight into exactly what ASM has been configured to do. And so it can make troubleshooting issues that we see from external connections somewhat tricky. The saving grace to that is having someone from, like we talked about the whole idea of DevOps is having someone from the team that's deployed the ESM that can work with us, and we can troubleshoot things sort of in tandem. And I think that's really, it sort of removes that non-deterministic behavior that we think we're seeing on the application side. And so having that cross-team communication really open when we run into problems sort of avoids that problem.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where, similar thing. We have, like Stephen was saying, we have layers of, we have ASM, we have iRules, all that stuff, and then the app, and then all of it. And if we see, a change in behavior, whether it's good or bad or whatever, and we're trying to figure out where it's coming from, if we just, if one person runs one test, we're going to go, well, somewhere between point A and the end, something changed.
Right.
Yeah.
But very quickly, we pop up in a chat or a phone call or a whatever, and go, hey guys, I see, this thing changed. I didn't change my end. Did you guys change it? And 2 minutes later, like you're saying, we remove the uncertainty of it, and someone goes, oh, hey, yeah, I did make a change that might have affected that, and you get the expert to tell you what changed and why, and that whole thing, right?
Yeah. So I think the non-determinism definitely comes from communication issues more than anything else.
It is not the infrastructure itself.
Right.
It's the infrastructure and lack of communication.
Yep.
If you have the communication, it is no longer an issue, right?
Right.
So I think you need to start thinking about, because historically you've got your application and it goes into this cloud. Use the term cloud.
Ooh, careful.
The cloud that's the network,
Yeah.
and it works its way out. But with the advent of administrative partitions and that kind of thing, being able to think about your application not just as the application server, but all its way through the stack.
Yep.
So if you can make this channel through the network that this section of configuration is for my app, shared configurations are a nightmare for QA testing and testing, right? So if you've got, like for instance, our DevCentral team going through the same network routing that our financial software is for the company, changes and testing and all of that is a much riskier issue. So segmentation is also important too, with not just the application, but working its way up. And think of that whole thing as your application, because really it is. It's delivery of your it's your end users connecting to get access to something, and the whole path there needs to be thought of as one set, and the teams involved of them need to be working together testing.
Well, and one of the things, I'd like you guys maybe to talk a little bit about how do you actually get to where the problem is too. So being able to peel layers back off very quickly, so you can very, if something did change and you didn't manage it, through configuration control, how do you find it? So, that's a big thing for us. We're always like something
we have
happened.
to learn how to do that, right?
Right.
And the quickest way we've learned to do it is to build multiple back-end routes, right? So it's the whole, so we can see the application as the world sees it, and then if we get into the appropriate authenticated space, we can view it one layer deep at a time. We can pull back, what does it look like without X device in front of it, or without X, Y policy in front of it, or without, we can, strip back the wall or the ASM or the iRules, we can strip back just to one or the other application server. We can do all of that stuff because we've had to build that functionality in for testing, right?
With my experience on the iHealth team, we've had a couple different ways that we solve that, and one of it is we get enough of the key players in the room, and someone will just say, oh, I think I know what that is, and they'll go off and fix it. And that's awesome, right? Problem solved. But then when that doesn't happen and no one is really sure, it goes back, like we've gone back to, we have access to each of the pieces in the stack, like you were talking about, because the application, you have to own the whole stack. And we start doing, I hate to say it, but we start doing TCP dumps, right? Because what's on the wire doesn't lie. And at some point, you find where the discrepancy is, and that sort of isolates the component that's causing the problem.
And so the other part of that, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So we keep moving on. The other part of that question was the Gong Fu part, which I love. Come on, it's some super geek reference. Is in somebody with large or dedicated iRules development stuff, where does that live? Who owns it? And that question is completely slippery. There is no right answer for that, right? It could be the folks that own the F5 devices if they are comfortable doing that coding. It could be the application guys if they're comfortable. Like, it really just depends on your particular organization, I think. I've not seen
I'm gonna go and say I think everyone. I think everyone owns
That's
that,
it,
right?
yeah.
It's not their fault, my fault, app team, dev team, network team. It's we as a team own it, and I think that's a shift. That's a big mental shift for organizations that haven't been structured that way for a long time, to be able to say, no. I don't. It doesn't matter where it happened. it's we all have to fix this, and I think that's the way we all operate is, and it's like, okay, something happened, everybody huddle,
which really leads to very quick resolutions to things,
right.
and frankly, a very go team mentality, which means it's no longer, it really does break down the wall of
right.
this is my stuff, this is your stuff. We're all accountable for all of it. Let's get it done.
Right.
Yeah.
And that also brings the point into the dev test cycle. Just history I've heard is the development work, the dev guys working on their laptop, right? And here the code works. I'm going to throw it into the network.
Oh yeah.
But thinking about deployment as a multi-step process, right?
Absolutely.
So you've got your dev work. Okay, I'm writing the code, testing it, but the QA piece needs to be through the full stack, right? Through the network.
Because you might make an app change that once it gets put into the full stack behaves differently.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and then working your way into production. So once theoretically, once you get into there, think of network changes as code reviews.
Right.
That whole process, right? You don't have somebody just wildly coding and putting things in. There's change requests. You have a review process, and that needs to be across this functional team. Right. So if a network person is making a change, the guy who's owning the network gear piece of it is doing the iRule changes, he's getting the developer to kind of review and understand the logic so they know the impact of it.
And that's a really good point, but it's sort of humorous in my mind because not because it's bad.
I usually make jokes, but that
No,
wasn't
a joke. Yeah.
Okay.
Not that it was a joke,
Right.
but it's a lesson that's hard learned, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to say you really need to do this and do the full stack and replicate your production environment, but that's actually sort of difficult to do in a non-production environment, and that's something that the iHealth team across IT, like all of the components of the iHealth team, have learned the hard way in the last 6 months, I would say, and we've gotten to the point now where we have in a lower environment multiple data centers, and we can fail over, and it's the full stack, and it's the actual hardware we're using in production, and we struggled a long time to do without that, and it was very painful.
And you were doing it wrong.
We absolutely were.
And everyone, that's not a.
But it's a resource
while,
limitation,
right?
and there's all kinds of reasons why you don't do that. But
with the advent of VE and the availability
so
of
much
that and
easier.
lab licenses and that kind of thing, the cost overhead, historically it's like I can't afford a triplicate set of hardware gear for my testing cycle, but with the with our virtual editions, it makes it easier to.
Well, and not just our virtual editions, but every the ability to use virtuals in general, because you don't always have the space, power, money, whatever to buy however many whatever kind of server iron you need, right?
Right.
But if we can virtualize those and test those, it's
we can run our whole network application stack on your laptop
right
there
exactly.
now with virtual appliances, so it does make that transition a little bit easier.
Yep.
All right, we got anything else?
Yeah, we got a lot actually. Ted's asking about the format of the event.
you're looking at it.
Yeah, this is it, Ted.
This is it. I'm sorry,
If
Ted.
it's not what you wanted, yeah.
No, I don't think I don't think Ted saw the video. So
Oh, okay, all right.
He was like,
So-
"Is this just a few people
Just
telling us
oh,
where they're
Ted
coming
thought
from?"
it was just a chat box. Okay, all right. Yeah.
sorry, actually, before we move on, real quick, the where does QA? The other part was iRules development, but there was QA and deployment was in that last question.
Yeah.
And we've discovered on the iHealth team that everyone's on board for all of those
Have to
things.
be.
And you have to be, and that's just the way it is.
Right.
So for testing deployment into the testing framework and also into production, everyone's on board doing testing, making sure everything goes smoothly, and being available in case there are problems. So I think the ownership of that resides within all members of the team. Really. It has to.
Well, and that actually, same question, or a version of that same question in a large shop with very isolated teams.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got. Let me go back. I lost that post there a little bit, but if I can just scroll up for 1 second. So you got ops, QA, testing, and app groups, and they're not. They may not physically be in the same building, right? And so
and iHealth definitely
Or the same city.
or the
Yeah.
same
Or
city,
we're
or the same
not.
time zone. We're not,
Yeah, we're
right?
not.
So
Yeah.
so how do you start bridging that together? So you've got separation today, and so you want to move to this model. What's the best way to start to encourage that to happen?
The iHealth team uses old school IRC.
Yeah.
We have a chat room, and everyone joins in, and we discuss all the issues in the chat room.
Yeah, we use IM. We use it all the time, right? We're messaging.
Oh yeah.
I think so. Luckily, it just kind of happened organically because it really did start with we have a team of 3. Joe and I are the 2 geeks doing everything on the. There's only so many people to do stuff, right? We were doing app stuff and network stuff, and as we grew, it kind of that was inherent for us. But I think realistically, if you're looking at this from an already established organization where you have these groups and there's there is the wall to bring down, I think the best way to do it really is if you're the doesn't matter what group you're in. If you are invested in this and making it happen, start reaching out, start approaching. Find the friendlies in the other
Right.
orgs
Yeah.
and start talking to them and just make it happen. And say, hey, walk by. If I'm the network guy or the systems guy or whatever, and Stephen's the app guy, I can walk by Stephen's desk or call him or IM him or whatever and say, hey, so I was looking at making this kind of a change, and I'm curious how that might affect the application. And there needs to be some kind of communication and sense of friendship, I suppose, but really the openness of the ability to communicate and ask questions. And
you have to have buy-in, right? I mean, you have to have all the teams need to buy into the idea, and if you're in a large shop, that's really difficult, especially if you're up against management issues,
Right.
political issues, geography, language in some cases in really large shops, and so you have to find a way to make those initial connections, and sometimes a way to do that is to pick kind of hand pick a project, one thing.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be the entire company, but it's going to be one project that you can say, let's try this, and it may be a little skunkworks project, it may be just one small feature on a roadmap, and go ahead and start to implement some of these concepts, and I think what you'll see, what we've seen, and we're not a big team, but what we've seen is it gets better as you go. You learn each lesson as you go, and you say, okay, next time let's do that a little differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So it's definitely an ongoing learning process, but you don't try to use a phrase we use a lot around here, you don't try to boil the whole ocean at once. You just pick one thing that you think could be successful, get some buy-in from those other teams, and measure it and manage, and then socialize it. If it's successful, talk about it all the time.
And why? Why is it different? How did it work? How did it impact my? Why did it take us less time and more successful? And bring it up.
Exactly. And the few barriers that we've had, where we've had different departments that we've worked with, I think as we started to do that, things got easier. Things got a little faster. There's more trust between the teams, right? Yeah. And so the security guys know that you've got security on your brain, right? And the networking guys know that you're not going to write an iRule that's going to, crash the box,
up,
right?
Yeah.
Well, not if you went through dev staging and then production.
That's right. As you should.
But jokingly, that's a good. But the truth is, there needs to be trust that you know what you're doing, right? You've proven those skills and earned that respect, and that you're going to stick to the agreed policies, right? Everyone's got to play the same game,
right? Exactly.
And I think the flip side of that is learning to let go of that's not my job.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
The trust is based on.
It's everybody's job, right?
Yep.
So, and another question here, just talking about config control. The question is do you mean automated config or change control? And I think we're talking about change control more than anything, at least at this stage.
Right. Yeah. Now, automated config, that's a great discussion, but that's more of a management discussion. As far as the DevOps thing, it really is more about change control and making sure everyone's on board and aware and in the loop.
Right. Right. Exactly. And we're just managing that currently in a pretty basic way. I think we aspire to have a better way, some fancy thing. But right now we're managing that through email and approvals, and this whole dev to stage to production model. It works really well, and as we've said, you can spin those up very easily, very inexpensively on a laptop if you needed to. But it's the type of thing where if you've got that right process and everybody buys in and expects it, then it does work. I
actually like Tom's reply to how we bridge alignment between groups, and he said go out for beers with them. So I won't always. I'm all for that. Yes.
There was one. I think we skipped a question there about. They were asking about. We keep mentioning how iRule changes can be fast. And they were asking about why is it fast? Is it because it's fast to develop, or is it? You would scroll up just a little bit.
Okay, sure.
There was a question. I think we skipped one. From Ted. It was Ted. No, it was Tom. I lied. Would iRule change be fast because the development cycle is less mature? I mean, the development cycle can be fast. I don't think it's necessarily less mature. Certainly, when I do write some of the iRules. Several of us do, but I do write some of the iRules that go into production for DevCentral. And my process is no less mature or developed than yours for the application is, right? I have I go to the development box and I write the code and I test it against the dev systems and we push it into staging. We go through the full test cycle against that and hit it with whatever we hit it with, and then put it into production. I mean, it's the exact same process. For me, I think it's faster because the application is far more involved, and you have to take a lot more things into account, right?
Especially if you're dealing with a commercial vendor, you know. So
Absolutely.
if you've got commercial software behind all of this, and you're negotiating and you're building projects and you're spending dollars with consultants to make changes, that just takes longer.
Yeah.
Those cycles are longer.
Even if it's
Right.
custom work, if you've got a security vulnerability that is attacked that you found on your software, on your site, on your backing code, even if it's yours, well, you got to go through, okay, I got to find the problem, I got to fix the problem, I got to verify that this fix doesn't affect anything else in the application,
Exactly.
because I'm affecting a shared library of functions
Yeah.
that are shared across different things. So now I got to go through each testing, that everything that uses that piece, and
Yep.
then we got to compile it, and then we got to deploy it and go through the testing, whereas it's talking about iRules and the network layer you're applying to a single point. Now granted, you still need to go through that testing cycle,
Yeah.
but you're typically a smaller piece of code, smaller amount of logic, and more isolated. And
Absolutely.
pointed.
So using that example, so I find out that on page X, input Y causes a vulnerability, right? I can't accept this one input on this one page for whatever reason. Well, all right, you can go into the application and go through the library that accepts inputs and does scrubbing and modify that. But what if some other page needs that input, and there's just so many things to think about and look into? And then what if you go and get, you roll the new version of software and somebody forgot to catalog that change and it doesn't get rolled in, and like all of that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
I can write
Good
an
thing
iRule.
you have unit tests and integration tests.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I can write an iRule very, very quickly that says it's really, I guess what it is it feels like application changes are broader strokes, and
Yeah.
the iRule stuff can be very, very surgeon, like scalpel tight, short changes where
Sure.
I want to say on this page with this input under these circumstances from these IP ranges, don't let it in. That's
Right.
super fast,
Right.
super, and they can be much bigger, broader things too.
I will
but-
say we're probably focusing more on break fix and maintenance and security vulnerabilities. I think if you're talking about project planning on basically blue sky projects and you're starting from scratch and somebody cracks open the IDE and says, what are we going to do?
Right.
There's a real opportunity to talk about where is the right place to do certain things.
Absolutely.
And there are times when I know the networking side can help take huge chunks off a project plan
Yep.
if we know we can solve that problem higher up. So it does depend a lot on the type of project you're dealing with and the scope, but I think the lesson there is don't think that you can only fix or develop or create these solutions in one layer. You can do it.
Totally.
You can do it in a lot of layers.
And there are different reasons to do it in different layers
Absolutely.
at different times, right?
So Ted was asking, does anyone know of a set of canned health monitors for, say, Oracle or WebLogic or Portal?
No.
I don't.
I don't. Not off the top of my head.
Sorry, Ted.
I would be willing to bet that if anybody does, so we also have some folks in the chat that are helping us answer questions that don't get through. I'm willing to bet that if anybody does, Jason's probably on top
Jason
of it,
might
finding
know that.
something.
Okay.
So,
All right. Sorry, Ted. We don't know off the top of our heads for those products. So with change control, how does the when help ops people see the value of the change approval and peer review? That's a great question right there. And how does that change from a checkbox to something that avoids additional nights of work to fix mess ups or embarrassing calls in the outage meetings?
yeah.
Also, how does one get ownership and accountability for peer review? Should the peer reviewer be personally accountable for the results of the change that they signed off on?
It's a doozy.
It is a doozy.
there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
But it's good. So let's.
Yeah, that's.
You can't scroll past it.
Sorry. I was getting to the next question, which I really like a lot.
Hang on a minute. We'll get there. Hold your horses.
Okay.
Look at you done.
Oh,
You've broken-
sorry,
you've broken
guys.
everything.
I'm new at this, so
Scrolling.
I'm good at
The-
scrolling.
The newest scrolling. So the Metro Change Control, how does one help the ops see the value? So the first part of the question really is how do we convince the ops people to see it as a way to avoid future work and not just extra time, right? And a box to check.
Right.
Which is a good question. I think you actually kind of touched on this earlier, which was you find a project that you convince people to go through this process on, and then the reality is, I mean, maybe this is just assumption, but I think it'll go better. I think it'll be easier. I think you'll see, you really will see that having everybody involved, it feels like it's a big effort to go, okay, everybody huddle, let's all get, but once you do it a few times,
Right.
it's way easier to have everyone huddle for 5 minutes and just hash it out than it is to send 35 emails over the course
Yeah.
of 2 days, right?
I think the peer review is a key component there too, especially if you can put that on some kind of your whatever your sprint cycles are. So you're not, the tendency is to meet often and sort of have micro conversations about lots of things
Right.
very often. If you can control the flow and organize that around, like, let's say a weekly code review, weekly deployment review, and that lines up with your dev, staging, and production push cycle. You're always a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead of where you're going to be with a production environment. If you can show those teams that are maybe a little reluctant to change their behavior that they're actually talking and meeting and fixing less often by actually reducing the points of it sounds sort of
No.
the wrong way to go, but you focus the communications on fixing the problems on a very specific cycle, and you actually end up doing less work. You're much more focused. You're able to meet, talk about it, break, and go on. One of the things we do on DevCentral is we have weekly stand-ups on Monday and code reviews on Friday. And so on Monday we talk about this is what we're going to do this week, and on Friday we review it.
Did it get done?
It's funny how often it gets done.
Yeah.
But it's it's just putting some boundaries, and you don't overscope it. You don't try to make it impossible, and you get realistic about what's a stretch goal and what's a real goal for the week. But that's all part. Your project management team needs to understand that that's part of the overall long-term roadmap of deliverables. But if you can get people to organize their cycles that way, and you can show the ops teams that they're actually dealing with fewer problems and they're fixing fewer things after the fact, I think you'll get some buy-in.
I think one of the hard problems, and I think what we're getting at this is in a traditional enterprise environment where you got the ops team. How do you get somebody to champion the effect to be able to say, okay, ops, I need some dedicated time to allocate, and it's a pseudo-organizational change, right?
Yep.
So again, we've got Tom here who suggested that they hire people with ops and network experience into the dev teams to kind of help bridge that gap. And I was going to get earlier that brick wall, typically the ops, network ops, aren't driving the application requirements. It's the application team. So it puts some onus on the developers and those app dev side of DevOps to understand what they can do with the network side.
Right.
Make use of online training or whatever you can for your network layer. Schedule an hour with your network guys to find out what's available and what you can do in your infrastructure. Say these are the types of problems we see. What can we automate? What can we make better? That's not taking a lot of resource time, but it does give the ops guys. I still think it kind of has to come from the ops out, unfortunately.
Well, and honestly, even without specifically asking the questions of, hey, I'm going to sit down with you today and find out what we can do, you really can, as we keep saying it, pick a project, get everyone involved.
Right.
Because once you're all in the same room, if I'm the app guy, I'm going to say, hey, so here's this project here, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Well, if the ops guy goes, wait, but I can do that part. Did you know I could do that? It might make more sense to do it in my world. And the app guy goes, what now?
Yeah.
Right? That kind of happens organically, I think, if you get the people in the room.
That's easy for a new one, but it's a little harder for existing.
Yeah, way harder for existing
right?
infrastructures. Yeah, for sure. And the other part of that question is a sticky one, which is tough. How do you get ownership and accountability for the peer reviewer? Should the peer reviewer be personally accountable for the results of the change they send off on? I know how I feel. What do you just want to go down the line?
Well, if you're reviewing,
should the peer? Yeah, I know you would. Should the peer reviewer be responsible? What do you guys think? Yes? No?
The team should be responsible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to, like we talked about before. Everyone has to have ownership. And so if
you're trying to,
if I sign off on something that is broken, sure, I'm gonna that's my fault and I'll take responsibility. But the team, we need to solve it as a team.
That's right. That was my exact response. Is that I don't think it should be, I'm the one responsible and you're my reviewer, so one of us is going to get.
I mean, the baseline problem here is you're trying to break down that it's not my problem behavior,
exactly.
right? So if you enable that, you have to take the team approach. Now, at the end of the day, someone is ultimately responsible, but you have to take the team approach to try to get everybody to buy in.
I don't think it should stop at peer reviewer either. So if I'm writing a piece of code that needs to be changed, you review it. It still should be going through the QA test cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
if you write it and you review it and I test it, well, we're all on
board,
there's
right? Sign off. So I think that question is somewhat missing a step along. It's not like I'm going to write something, you review it, and it's live.
Right.
I think there needs to be more team validation
really
along the way. So it's like any other piece of code that you do my code review. Okay, well, the code looks great, but from a code review standpoint, you don't know every vector that comes in that touches that code.
Code review doesn't cover the whole stack.
That should be covered within the testing cycle.
And that kind of leads to that actually, your comment is awesome, because that really does. You're welcome. That really does help.
I don't get a compliment.
I just don't like you very much. It really does help lead to the explanation of how you get it to be a team thing. It needs to be team focused, not individual focused. Well, that's why. That's how. Is because the reality is, every person on that team should have touched it or seen it or talked about it or something before it hits live.
Right. The one additional step I think that is it wrappers this entire thing is, although your code reviews and cycles may be, let's say, weekly, it's also important to include your stakeholders in that, because while the code may be perfect and not have any, we may not introduce any bugs, it still may miss the mark. And so including your stakeholders in that, maybe not on that same frequency, but on a frequency, so they understand that we're actually not only so that the team understands we're not just writing code that works, we're writing code that solves problems for our stakeholders.
Do beers or IRC scale? I think beer does.
Beer does.
Always scales.
Yeah, that's not a problem. If you have multiple dozens of ops teams, multiple dozens of app teams, and around a dozen of QA testing teams, how does that scale? I think it gets down to you got to start small and work your way up and find a solution that works for you. Because I don't think there is any silver bullet to say this is how it works, because every organization is different, right? So it's going to be how it works with yours. So pick something that is isolated enough, small enough that you can learn from it and build.
Yes.
And
again,
ultimately it will.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Ultimately, I think once you build those teams or those vertical layers for your application, I think it will scale. But
it really is the kind of thing where we talked about earlier, the whole, if you have, an organization like this where you have lots and lots of people involved, don't try and get all of them doing this. It's probably not going to work.
Pilot it with a...
Pilot it, get some management support, have them help you identify the right people in the right teams, pilot it and go, okay, this guy, and this guy, and these three, whoever the people are, get together and work on one project that only involves a few of the teams, and then the next time do it a little bit bigger. And like Joe's saying, you have to kind of do it piece by piece and organically. You can't just go, okay, this is how it is now.
Right. And without knowing the details of the applications in the organization that you're dealing with, I mean, part of this may actually mean you need to face organizationally restructuring so that you've got actually more smaller teams. So you don't have a ginormous QA department that's in San Diego and a development department that's in Finland. You've got teams that are maybe stratified a different way. So you've got smaller teams focusing on smaller functionality. Now, your app needs to support that. You have to have a modular approach towards development. There's a lot of dependencies there, but it does sort of, if it's successful in your organization, it does sort of force you to think through how you organize teams. One of the things that I did before I came, a long time before I came to F5, was work on a large development team. And when we started, it was just a big room of developers and project managers and QA people. And it was very difficult to get anything shipped, and certainly not on time. And we were in a consulting environment, so it was also, we had a lot of very uncomfortable chargeback conversations at the end of every month. And so one of the things we did was we organized 70 people into groups of 5 or 6, and changed their focus from the entire project to this part of the project. And within a few months, it things got shipped on time. We implemented peer and code reviews. We implemented stakeholder reviews, and our chargeback numbers went down and our revenue numbers went up. So we had a lot of change to manage, but it at the end of the day it worked. Now, I don't know if that would work for you, but you may want to sort of think about it. If it's successful in a pilot environment, how can you replicate that? How can you make cookies, from that cookie cutter, and organize yourselves around that concept?
Well, that's almost what you're talking about. Really, is almost organizing around applications or sections of this team that might be 100 developers here and 100 QA people here, and they all work on all of the apps, right? The idea is, well, okay, if you take some of these developers and some of these QA people and some of these operations people, and suddenly this horizontal layer here across all of the groups is responsible for this application or this portion of it, right? That's kind of what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So Mike wanted to know if we've defined DevOps yet.
We've been trying for the past 40 minutes.
Saying this the first couple of minutes. Please
Yeah.
rewind.
We're gonna go with a sure. Yeah, right.
We've talked about it a lot. So
Yeah.
so now that we've talked about it for a while, to restate, I think kind of what we've all been saying is
Dev plus ops.
right. DevOps is
There you
the
go.
idea of
Ops.
a
Hey,
single
there's a T-shirt idea.
a single
right
cohesive.
there. DevOps.
Can't trying to help here, Mike. I'm trying, dude. Really, these guys are just. So to me, I think to restate simply, so we're halfway through, more whatever. DevOps is the idea of a single cohesive group that is responsible for the application in its entire life cycle, right? Whether it's and not just life cycle, but its entire infrastructure, whether it's network or systems or application development or QA or anything. It's one group that is responsible for all of those aspects with experts from each arena, right?
Yep.
Yep.
I wonder what the next question was because my battery just died.
Oh. Well, Joe has the questions.
Joe has the question.
Okay,
there.
well,
Like King
iPad to the
Power
rescue.
cord.
You bring a power cable?
Sure, I did.
You're the project
It's all right.
manager.
It's all right.
All right. Where
It's
are
a
we
team
at?
problem. It's not
Team
his
problem.
fault.
That's right.
That's right, Joe.
We're a
See?
vertical channel
Okay,
here.
we've
Let's
had
see.
we've had a failure.
Well, okay, I don't have from the top, so I'll just randomly pick some. Hopefully, apologize if I missed a couple on the line or two. There were a couple questions about configuration on the network layer, how we configure pools and things. We can answer those in the chat, or you can answer those in DevCentral. Some about priority groups and that.
Yeah,
kind of
as far as
stuff.
how do you get one server to be active and all that kind of stuff.
If you don't have if you don't understand that, post the advanced design and config forum on DevCentral after this, and we'll.
I saw
check
Jason
and-
was answering some of those
Yeah.
though, because he's on top
Okay.
of all that. So
So I'm going to jump down to Ted asked something, and then Jason.
I've recovered from the failure, guys.
have
Okay.
you?
I have. We had a.
We still have no monitor, so
Do you have a monitor?
I can read it though.
okay.
Is
Okay.
that okay?
Read it. Have at it.
All right.
do we
So
got next?
typically in an ERP app purchase software, they refer to persistence of passive cookies versus active cookies and SSL persistent. Which types of persistence do you see mostly in use, or does it vary greatly?
That's an interesting question. That's very specific, and I've seen persistence vary wildly based on the application, right?
It's really hard to say what. Maybe from iHealth, from the metrics and stuff we see from.
Well, it's
Configuration
application
case,
specific,
but-
right?
Yeah.
However your application is designed and needs things to work, and frankly, whatever type of client you're seeing, because the reality is, we're not just talking about web applications here, right? We're talking about, F5 devices front all sorts of things, whether it's web or some other non-standard ports or UDP or who knows, right? So we see a lot of cookie persistence in web apps, but that doesn't work everywhere. So we see a lot of whether it's source persistence or some custom persistence they're rolling based off of bits that are in the stream somewhere. I mean, we see lots of different stuff depending on what the application calls for. So I'm not sure I would have any idea what the most common one is necessarily.
Yeah. I think it just varies.
We have a question from Angelo in looks like Spanish. Can
Have
anybody
at it.
interpret?
Go.
Okay. Hola.
No,
Buen
don't do
dia.
that. That's
Okay. Sorry, man.
we don't know
We'll
this
find
yet.
somebody who can.
Josh translated it.
Okay.
So.
Did Josh
Yeah,
translate
yeah,
it?
it's further down. So.
Oh, Josh, look at you.
Okay.
You rock, dude. All
Wait,
right.
so he was making a joke and you actually speak Spanish? Wow, all right.
So do you have another
do,
question
I do.
here?
So
he did.
Tom's asking, the point he's trying to get to is we push app code through unit tests, integration, system tests, all automated. iRules in many places don't get that kind of test coverage.
Why?
So why? So how can we is there a way we can help him incorporate iRules into unit tests and automation?
Well, I suppose it really depends on how you're testing, right?
Right.
If you're doing there are certainly, this is one of the things we've heard about iRules before, but if you're doing specific tests, like if you're programming in .NET or whatever it is, and there's a specific test function you're using in the suites, right? That you can't do that with iRules.
Right.
But what I would recommend, and what we certainly do, is, and John, you were saying the same thing, you have to have real world tests. You can't just push the button in the unit test and say, well, the unit test passed, this must work. You really do have to, at some point, go through the testing of the new change in the full application stack, which will include the iRule, it will include the policies, it will include the configuration changes in the F5 devices. It has to,
Right.
otherwise you're not getting a real test.
Although with virtual editions, you could sort of mock that up as a unit test.
Sure.
And look at inputs and outputs from
Sure.
the iRule. I mean, you could.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to go that route, you certainly could. For me, I mean, I test the iRules before we push them even to dev. Obviously, right? I have tested that running to see the like you say, inputs and outputs. But once you put it in dev, you start testing the entire stack.
Yep.
And if as long as you're isolating changes, if that's the only change that's been made, now you are testing just the iRule change, right? Because nothing else is different. Right?
Yeah, there's a question here. Any tips on iRule testing against in-house apps? If iRules are part of the app stack, how can we enable QA to help validate them? And I think we talked about the whole process of development testing on your laptop when you're writing the code versus the next step is the actual staging area to production. And you need to start thinking of testing your application, treat the network and your application as a whole as part of your test cycle.
Absolutely.
So QA, which is testing features on the app, need to test it through the network layer because that is your app. That is part of your app.
Yeah.
You need to start thinking
I think
about
that question, and I don't know this person's environment obviously, but that questions like that come a lot from people that have a testing environment that is just the app server, right? It's just the app server and whatever it requires to run the DB or whatever it is, right? And so you go, oh, well, I tested it. How do I test my iRule? Well, in my opinion, in our opinion, your test environment, your staging environment needs to be the entire app stack. It needs to be all of the devices, all of the firewalls, all of the whatever you're going to run. You need to have that in place for a true test.
It does come back to that holistic approach towards it. So even if all of our unit testing passes and we push out to staging, at that point we need to externalize a regression test or something. Even if that's just a QA person plunking away on the app and making sure things don't break, you uncover things that you will never find, in an IDE-based unit test. So, absolutely.
And the iHelp team actually, for doing that full application stack testing, we've written a bunch of stuff with Selenium, which is sort of a automated running of a web browser, and we just build up Selenium tests to hit all the feature sets in iHealth, and that's part of our regression testing before we deploy. And that can hit the whole stack in sort of an automated fashion.
Right.
Tom says, it sounds like you're using iRules to fix other problems. I think in some of our comments, we're talking about iRules a lot, but that could be your application firewall as part of your network stack as well. We talk about iRules a lot because we use them as
and we're
pieces.
iRules geeks, to be honest.
There's sections of our application flow logic that made sense for us to put out in the front.
Absolutely.
URL redirecting and things like that didn't make sense for us to code into each of our applications. It was easier for us to manage in the network layer. But back to Stephen's comment earlier, you really need to think about what needs to go where. iRules is not a stopgap or end-all, be-all for any application woe you have.
Yes, it is. Yes. No, I'm kidding.
You shouldn't be thought about that way because there is maintenance there, right? And even our stuff is getting a little complex, and then you've got management of that. So
one of the things I did we recently did a version change in the whole bit. I went through and spent many hours going through and consolidating and optimizing and tearing things apart and reorganizing. And so
we do a combination of security vulnerabilities in our rules that are small and pointed enough that don't really flow into our application firewall or app logic thing. We do just logic application flow things where we're trying to tie multiple applications together on the back end to make that some of our authorization pieces are done at the middle layer. But we try to refrain from any application-specific logic living in the network piece. So
the question, we certainly do talk about them a fair amount, but the reality is it's only one of the many things that goes into this whole DevOps idea for us. Right? It's a tool in our toolbox. We use it when we can. We might use it a little more than some folks because it's so germane for us. It's natural for us to do it, but it's one of the tools that goes out there and helps you do things right.
So some of the stuff that's coming up now is how do you convince management? I think the word suit might have been used, but how do you convince management that this is a good idea? And you're asking them to change the way that they've been doing things for a very long time.
My personal experience has always been that results speak. And if you have to skunk, I don't know if we're supposed to say this, but if you can skunk works a project out that shows how much better it is, that's the best proof you can do. That's the best convincing you can do.
Well, and the reality is, obviously this is org to org and team to team, but I would think if you are invested in this idea and if I'm the app guy and I find the network guy and I find a couple friendlies, one in each of the major teams, and get them on board and go, okay, hey guys, for our next change, we'll go through the official process, go through the red tape and make sure everybody gets approval. But then when it comes time to actually do, each section of the change, like when it comes to develop, I'd like to then have a 20-minute meeting and talk about what I changed and why with you guys and involve you. And for the change control window, I want to be on the horn, all that kind of stuff, right? And so you're not really going outside of the normal process. You're adding to the normal process and showing that, hey, this shortened the window because of this involvement. And we all got warm fuzzies and it was a good experience.
Right.
And then you can take that, like you're saying, the result, and go to management and say, hey, so we tried this time and here's the result and what happened. We'd like to try it more officially next time. And, then 3 or 4 of those things down the road, you can start talking about, all right, we've been doing this for a month and a half now, and it's been going really well.
We haven't had a code rollback.
Yeah, it's been going really well. We'd like to start talking about making this the official process, or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it is something that you have to have a champion. You have to have a sponsor that at least thinks this is a good idea and is willing to give you the air cover runway, room you need to get something done. If it's something that the organization's just wired in a different way for, I think you're right, finding that pilot project or one win you can get. I completely agree. Success, breeds more.
Absolutely.
So you just keep trying to get those wins. A couple of other things, we were talking about manageability and solving problems at the iRule level, and this is a problem I think we're talking about ourselves. There's Peter saying, any tips for managing the URL redirects? The list of redirects starts to get unmanageable after a while, and the ops guys get mad and say the iRules are a mess.
Yes, I can tell you exactly how we did that because we just did that. Well, it's been a while now. Jeez, time flies. But we had the same kind of thing. So I feel your pain. Trust me. Joe and I have been the ones that were managing that iRule. Well, Jason too. Anyway, managing that iRule, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger as you add more things and more apps and more redirects. And the class command, like Joe said, is the best way I can think of doing it. You can create a single class, and in that you can put all of your redirect pairs, the URL that comes in and where you want to send them to, and then you have literally one command. And our iRule shrunk by I think 65 lines or something like that, and all of those 65 lines of redirects is now one lookup in the class, and you just do the redirect. And
it's taken the data portion out of that out.
Exactly.
And it allows you to have daily updates of those without affecting the logic of the iRules.
And it's faster. It's way faster, just so we're clear. I mean, if you're doing a switch even, or compared to a class, it's so much faster. Class is super optimized.
Check out our optimization
tech
tips and things.
I know. We have lots of those out there.
One of the Tom, back to the accountability thing. Tom made a point that personal accountability is not good for fostering relationship. That team accountability is.
Yeah.
I totally agree with
I
that.
agree too.
I do too.
That's a really good point.
So as one of these questions, and I'll just sort of summarize it, as dev and ops and QA all kind of merge together, and you start focusing on individual apps or components, how do you maintain standards? Basically, how do you start to scale something like that within the application? I'm curious to see what you guys say. I have a thought on that, but
so say that again.
So you take the focus away from sort of the vertical approach, right? How do you maintain standards within app development and across those? If let's say you have 300 developers vertical today, and you turn that into 30 teams of 10.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've got a standards issue that you've got to start to think through.
I guess for me, the standards would still be in place, right? It's the whole, okay, well, just because these teams work more horizontally than vertically, like, I might not only work with other developers today, I might work with, this ops-focused team or this app-focused team. That doesn't mean that I'm not an app developer and I'm not part of the app development team. The reality is it's not crushing the vertical element, it's just adding the horizontal element too, right? So I would still identify as an app guy, and I would still identify as part of that team, and I would still adhere to those standards that the team has.
Right.
I don't think that would have to dissolve.
Right.
Personally.
And my experience, I mean, for the iHealth team, that definitely has been true. It's more of like each individual sort of department has their standards about how they want to do things. Like, so let's just take deployment as a good example. The IT ops folks have the way they want to deploy applications so that it's as smooth as it can be for them and catches problems and that kind of thing. And working with developers doesn't change that at all. That's just one example. It just means that developers become aware of their procedures and why they do it and understand that that's how it's done.
Yeah.
And I think again it comes back to that communication. And if everyone understands what each other's standards are and what they need to do to maintain their own sanity, then it tends to work itself out.
Right.
And it does depend on the application and how the application is how the architecture works. I mean, we're lucky in that we use a framework that we can plug into, so we know what the standard is, because if you don't follow the standard, your code doesn't work inside the application. So, you know, there are ways to consider how your architecture supports this kind of a concept. You know, if you're in a very large vertical application, this is something that may be very difficult to implement, you know, in like an insurance claim system as an example. But in a website, it's probably a lot easier to implement something like this, where if you've got a CMS or some framework behind the scenes that helps you design to a standard, and whether that's a code standard or a you know, UX UI standard. I mean, there's a lot of levels there. The key there is just to make sure you have a standard. You know, generally top-down standard management is because there isn't a defined or published standard. So if you have one, just make sure you're sticking to it. It does depend on the application, but it is something that I think can be managed in this environment as well.
I think we're
out of time. So
should we grab one more question?
Yeah.
I got one more here that could be kind of quick. Do the DevOps crew typically have full reign within their applications partition? Are mature IT shops doling out admin responsibilities to the DevOps folks?
That's an interesting question.
That is.
I especially like the our mature IT shops doling out admin responsibilities. I think they already doled out. Like, to me, DevOps isn't this new player in town that's coming in to take over. It really is dissolving the boundaries between existing players and reforming them into DevOps, right? So it's not the people that will be in the DevOps team, in my opinion, will already be the ones that have the responsibilities, right? This isn't like you're giving somebody, a new person you're hiring, access and responsibilities. You're saying, hey, these are the folks that were already doing each step along the way, but they were doing it in a very non-linear kind of fashion, and now we're going to combine it and make it more organic.
But I think there is some bleed over that happens. For instance, I think traditionally developers don't always have administrative access on the production app servers.
Certainly.
I hope that's not true. We do, because we help troubleshoot issues all over the place. So as you start to work cross-functionally as a team, those things tend to work themselves out, and people get the rights and privileges and accesses that they need to get the job done.
What we've done as a team is we've got the dev, staging, production, where we have full access to the staging area. So we can work in the deployment cycle, and then once it's tested, validated, and we have our IT contacts as well within that flow there. But then the actual push to production is handled by
specific people
in IT, but it's a defined process there. Right. So
that's the same with iHealth. Same
so
kind of flow.
Granted, not everybody can afford an application stack, but with the virtual pieces,
it
makes
really
it a lot more.
Than it used to be.
A lot more,
that's true.
Usable. So,
well, we tried to get to every question. I don't know if we got to all of them. We did miss a few, but if you've got additional questions, please feel free to post in the DevCentral forums, and we'll be on and checking them and get you some answers. Appreciate everybody coming today, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
Sure.